everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Fraud Boxer Podcast. Today, I have Scott Adams, the man himself, here with me. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
So you and I met several years ago, at least 5 years ago, back when you were still at Riot Games, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I think we met at an MRC, which we were just talking about the MRC as well. Yeah, it's kind of the organization that brought a lot of us together, and then you've been kind of doing other things since the Riot Game days, and we'll get all into that. So let's go all the way back. Let's tell people who you are, where you came from, how you got here. Just do your whole intro for them, if you could, please.
Sure. Well, like you said, so I'm Scott Adams. I've been doing fraud risk payments for over 20 years now. I started as a merchant. Actually was just telling somebody my first business was like in 5th grade. Always been an entrepreneur, but after college, I got into a little ebook company as IT director. And like a lot of us back then, there weren't anti-fraud companies. There's no education. And we were doing great, selling a lot of ebooks at the time. And then I actually got the idea to move it into subscriptions. And so we actually created a product, did really well. But then we had a lot of fraud. And we did lose a few merchant accounts at the time.
Wow.
Back then, it wasn't a blacklist, though. There were no match lists, no TMF. And so we just got another one. It wasn't a big deal until it was.
Yeah.
And just the money kept piling up that the banks were holding. And, so finally I got lucky, and I was working with a marketing company that I went to a conference, and they heard somebody speak about fraud. And then I realized, hey, there's conferences. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
And so that's when I started going to things like MRC, Payments Ed, all the ones you guys have all been to. And, so that got me into fraud. That's when I figured out this thing. I realized I had to learn fraud if I wanted to keep my business alive.
That's a good point. Like when finding out there's conferences, I remember when I kind of shared it on another episode, like my history and how I wound up in fraud. But I was doing fraud already, just kind of like you were, like I was making rules, I was managing like negative and positive lists, doing the job. But then I actually had JP Morgan came in to do like a QBR for my business at the time, and I was doing the fraud piece with them, and they're like, "Yeah, are you going to the Merchant Risk Council conference?" Like, I was like, "What's that?" And they're like, "It's the fraud conference." I'm like, "There's a fraud conference?" And then I got approval to go right away. It was funny because I was still a contractor at the time, so I wasn't allowed to have like a corporate card or anything. So they actually had to give me petty cash out of the drawer to go and pay for everything, and then like bring back the receipts and account for everything. I just had like this big wad of cash that I had to use. It was different time back then.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing that happened too. Like, I think the first event I went to was Payments Ed, back then called Direct Response Forum, and it was literally the same thing. Like, we were with Lytle and Company at the time, which is now Vantiv e-commerce, I guess.
Oh, WorldPay. It's FIS.
It's mutated a few times, but they, Tom Lytle, I'm sitting at the table with him. He's going over stuff, and he says, "Hey, have you ever been to this conference?" And I didn't know what conferences even were. And so he said, "Oh, you're coming. You're our guest. Let's go." And, a month later, I'm at my first conference. A few months later, I'm at, MRC. And ever since, I've not missed many of these conferences. And they're just such a great information. And now, being more experienced, I love to share that information. And, it's so important, because there is not good education out there beyond maybe, the conferences. But then it's either one thing or another. It doesn't cover the whole spectrum. It's very cherry picked for the hot topics, because you want to get people to your conference, which makes sense.
Yeah. I actually have yesterday I had to go up to Napa for a quick couple of days. My best friend's father passed away, and we were all very close to him. And I was coming back last night, and I was sitting in the Sacramento airport in the middle of California. It just delayed, because that's what happens when you fly Southwest. And I don't normally fly Southwest, but I had a ton of credit that I had to burn, and it was what a better time to do that when the last second flight. But the guy walked into the bar that I was sitting at, because that's what I do, and he had an ACFE bag on, and I was like, "That's so strange," because I've never seen one in the wild. And I talked to him just briefly for a second. He helps with like government audits, watching for fraud and stuff like that. But I just thought it was so weird and small world to see like a certification backpack of like one of like 2 certifications. I know MRC is getting ready to launch theirs, so we'll just throw them in already. But that's like kind of what it's been. That's been our training. That like if you really wanted to have some sort of piece of paper that says what you did, because there wasn't a college course for this. I mean, I think there is now, if I'm not mistaken. There's one.
They're so far behind though.
Yeah, and it's like here we all are doing. I remember when we went to I went to the first MRC myself. It was I think 2012's, might have been earlier, but was when it was at the Win, and there wasn't very many of us, and everybody knew everybody, and I didn't know everybody yet at the time. But now when you go like when I look at like the big room during like the opening keynote and stuff, and it's just thousands of people, and it's like wow, like everybody realized it. And I think it was the same thing like that I see happen time and time again, that what you probably see in your consulting side is like just like you saw with the books. It's like you're doing these sales, and then all of a sudden you get what's this charge back? Why are you holding my money? Why my money go away? And then you start looking at it, and then you get frustrated, and you call like your ISO and you start complaining about it, and then they tell you what's going on, and then you start the first one comes in and you're like, shit, maybe this was just a fluke. And then all of a sudden you get like 10 because it's out there now that you're exposed and you can fraud your system over there. So it's just like snowballs from there. And then everybody does the same thing. They start with the negative list, like the email, negative list, the credit card. And then it just gets more sophisticated. So
go back, you're talking about 1 or 2 coming in, go back in 15, 20 years almost, my first company. I was telling somebody else today, we literally would have, I don't know if you've ever seen these because mail isn't as big a deal now. Like, the post office has these crates that are
like the little plastic ones.
Yeah, the big plastic ones. Yeah, they're like bigger than a file.
Yeah, you put everything. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So we used to get multiple of those a day, full of paper chargebacks.
The ones you had to attach a receipt and all that, and staple it, and then you had to fax it in on the old fax machine.
Yes,
I did have to do that when I worked retail. I didn't know I was doing chargebacks at the time.
And luckily now it's mostly digital. But here's the interesting thing: from just one of our clients is down in Honduras, and there's still paper.
Yeah,
there's still everything takes months. They don't even have, and this is what I'm consulting with them about. They don't even have a way to do refunds. They thought they were doing them, but what I discovered is they're doing voids.
Oh,
well, I'm doing refunds, but the bank says I can't do it after a couple of days. And
interesting. So so they're just trying to avoid a pending, and like as soon as it settles, their bank tells them they can't do a refund.
Yeah. And so then so I called up some friends from MasterCard and Visa and found out, well, technically, obviously, the regulations say otherwise. But it's like they kind of had a first rush down there. They got things set up, and then they haven't been back. And so there's a lot of banks, if there's the smaller local regional ones, that very unsophisticated. So I'm actually trying to help the merchant, help the bank figure out how to do this. And it's a really interesting project. Plus, I don't really speak Spanish, so I understand. But luckily, my wife she's part of the team. She's fluent. But even still, like, she's not business fluent, and so it's interesting trying to figure out words that even sitting with that one of the other guys that's helping us with it, he's actually from a Latin American country and Spanish speaker natively, and even he was having trouble coming up with what word do you use.
Mm-hmm.
He thought refund was a void, and or vice versa, and so we finally came up with it. My wife realized, well, wait a minute, let's try the Portuguese word for refund. And it was the same word. Just
interesting. Yeah. God, they're
then
kind of
we were talking about
Brazil and all that and Honduras are a little far apart, aren't they? I'm not super brushed up on my
they are
Latin and South American geography these days.
No. Brazil and Honduras are far apart, but she grew up on the border of Paraguay and Brazil.
Okay.
At least like her first 12 years of living, and so she got fluent in Spanish. But her Brazil speaks Portuguese.
Yes, they do.
But it's Latin based, so there's a lot of overlap words.
Yeah, I've noticed that when I work with some of I use D local, and a lot of those folks down there are obviously in Brazil and stuff. So when I hear them speaking, I know Spanish to not a level that I can converse in it, but I can understand it. So I hear occasional words. I'm like, refundo. Just kidding, everybody. I know that's not right.
But that's where those are the kind of interesting problems that come up. And and I first learned that going back to my background. I kind of told you sort of how I got into fraud. But then as I left that company, they started having trouble, mostly because like I was running it, but I had two partners that owned vast majority of it. And it's my I was really young, first job, first real official job in this world of payments and things. And so I didn't believe in there when they wanted to do things that I considered shady, and then did consulting, and then through that ended up actually at the MRC, and somebody told me, hey, this video game company needs somebody. And I wasn't really looking for a job, but I thought, hey, it could be a good consulting gig. And so I submitted an application, and like the same day the recruiter called me and had me fly out to LA. And that's kind of how I got into Riot Games. They didn't really have the role that fit my experience.
Yeah.
And the guy said, well, let me fix that. And so the next day he calls me and he says, okay, so I got it opened up for a director role. You can, run all of basically risk for the company. And so I took it as a consulting thing, and then eventually took it as a job and was there for over 5 years, right around 5 years. That was Riot Games, maker of League of Legends. Now
I was just gonna say, like, to the audience, like, you might not know Riot as a company name, but they do League of Legends is like their big one, and that is just
it's still huge.
Everywhere.
Yeah. And it really put esports on the map. We actually, when I was there, one of the things that we did was we got the US government to approve a visa for esports players.
Really?
Because before that, they were to come in as tourists.
Yeah.
And I remember
jive. Like StarCraft like would have like little competitions that was like over in like South Korea and stuff. But then I remember when League of Legends was really starting to blow up in like, what's that, like the early 2010s. That's when even you guys at Riot had opened. Like, I used to work in the building across from your newer campus in LA that you guys had built in like 2012, 13. And then we had Chelsea Handler, where she would film the Chelsea Lately TV show, was like in our parking lot right next door to us. When she moved that and went over to the Universal backlot, you guys at Riot actually bought that building. Hulu was there too. Hulu's had their headquarters there too, and turned it into like this whole, like, that's where you guys do competitions and stuff in there and like broadcast. And I remember one time we were up in the office, we were doing late night, like getting ready to release a bunch of stuff on Fandango. I look out my window and you guys had like a whole like arena. It looked like WWE WrestleMania out there with lights going, just hundreds and hundreds of people, and then computers set up in the middle of the ring with just like some guys gaming, and it had up on the screens. And I know those, like, League of Legends is like more like it's like matches where it's not very much. It's like 15 minutes or something, right? It's like not very much time.
Well, there is a game mode that's short, but the average game is 45 minutes to an hour.
Okay.
It's what I described it as capture the flag, for people that aren't video gamers, because it's 5 players versus 5 players, and you've got a map. You start on either side of the map, and then you're basically trying to destroy the other guy's base, which is opposite yours. But there's a jungle in between and lanes and all sorts of different characters, champions we called them. And you fight it out and hopefully get to the other side and destroy the base.
I think especially with like gaming like that, a lot of people are like, well, what is fraud? Unless you know, like, what does fraud have to do with gaming? And I think that especially when mobile apps came into play, and that's where like this type of gaming really crossed over into our world, because as we all see the news reports and things, there's microtransactions that exist in games now. So if you wanted like your character to look a little different, you could buy it for $1.99, a new outfit, or you could pay an extra $5 to get these golden coins that building a house in your game that's going to take 3 days will now take 15 seconds. And these microtransactions, they add up to a lot of money, to hundreds of millions of dollars a month to these companies. And sometimes, every once in a while, those microtransactions are subject to 2 main things. You correct me if I'm wrong. They're subject to buyer's remorse. Sometimes late night, you get frustrated, you bought too many, or maybe your son or grandson might have got a hold of your credit card and went a little crazy when you weren't looking overnight and spent $10,000 in an hour. And those are the ones that where then our stuff comes into play. There's also, of course, stolen credit cards. That's always going to exist for people that want to do that. But people that really care about their game probably don't want to have their account locked and deleted as much. So I would say first party fraud in this, and I'd love to talk about it a little bit as we go into this gaming thing with you, because you've done a number of gaming companies, how much and how prevalent first party fraud is and what you actually do about that. That's okay. So
well, so to just super fast forward, the last corporate role I held since we're talking about friendly fraud, was actually on Count had absorbed my Visa VMPI facilitator, and then I helped them build their DCM product. And Brad Christian and I came up with the title, I think still the first and only in the corporate world, VP of friendly fraud. So definitely something that I've done a lot of. But yeah, so go back to Riot and video games. So first, it's interesting. So you say it really came in our world with mobile, but I would say it's well before that. So
interesting.
I think what you just described is, League of Legends, when they launched, one of the things that I loved about Riot, and I still love about Riot, is that it's all about the player. And, that's something that it was one of the reasons they had so much trouble finding people for the fraud department. And before they found me, they had apparently had like 100 interviews. And, they kept talking to those bankers and people like this, and it was all about the money. But Riot's, one of their core tenets is player first. And so one of the neat things that they had is that, and they still do, I think they kind of probably pioneered this, was free to play. You literally can play League of Legends and never spend a dime.
Yeah.
If you're content with playing the rotation of free characters, free champions, and so, you can't have a favorite that you only play that guy because he's not going to be free every week. And I haven't played in a little while. They might have changed some of this up, but I'm sure they haven't changed the free to play aspect, which means literally you can never spend a dime of that game. But like you described, you can buy things, but it's all cosmetic.
Yeah, it doesn't actually give you an edge, right? That's like the big thing.
So a lot of games do try to do this, but then it starts crossing into, oh yeah, you can buy the sword, which is more powerful. And that we call that pay to win.
Yeah, and that's unfair. That's where Ubisoft was getting a little bit of crap for, because people could do that and it could give you an edge.
Exactly. So, but flip side, if you think about it, even with free to play, like I said, with how Riot's free to play works, is it rotates so many champions every week that you can play for free. Now, you don't have any skins, you don't have any, basically any kind of cosmetics. You just get the base champion. But again, there's no power advantage here. So if you're good at that champion, all good. No reason you don't buy anything, even if you're bad at it, because you can't buy power.
I'm having flashbacks to my Mario Kart 64 days, because they have all the characters that you could drive. I haven't played Mario Kart on the newer ones. I haven't, but I always would pick Toad because he was light and fast. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, I only would pick him. And it would have been so much more interesting at the time if that game would have forced me to use the other characters. So I would have had to get good, as they say in gaming words, get good. I would have had to get good at using different characters. So that's a good idea for rotating.
Yeah, and then so the thing is, though, is that like there's so if you're familiar with video games and stuff, there's a thing called Penny Arcade. It's little cartoons and things about video games. And there was one back, and it's framed in Riot's headquarters, about a guy saying, "Hey, isn't it cool that League of Legends is free to play?" The guy said, "Yeah, I love it. It's I don't have to spend anything." Then the guy says, "Yeah, but how much have you spent?" "Oh, I've spent $1,000. "Oh yeah, but I've spent $1,200. It's like because it's so much fun, and you want the skins, you want to show things to your friends. And this is kind of where we're now talk about fraud. So everything you described, yeah, definitely. There's a lot of different types of fraud that happen, but it's literally all the same fraud that happens to your company, to any of our companies, happens there. But one, it's at massive scale, because the game is the number of players are massive. And two, and this is where it gets a little different, sometimes money is not the goal.
Okay.
Like, we've been in our brains are trained as fraud people and payments people, it's all about the money. But when you're talking about a video game, it's not. So, one story from Riot was, we were having, they had a bunch of different fraud issues. And one of them that we were seeing, though, and this is a little less fraud, a little more maybe, keeping the game fun, but it turns into fraud, is that people wanted, one, to be a high level. So you had to get to like level 20 to play in what they called ranked, which is where it was a little more competitive game. And two, we talked about skins. Well, there's something else that you could get that you couldn't buy. Was that whenever the game loads, it shows all the champions that are in the game and your summoner name, which your in-game name, on the screen, and that waits while the game's loading, getting you onto the right server, these kind of things. And there's a border around it, around your champion. And that border signifies what level you've gotten to is ranked. And this is supposed to be impossible to buy. And so two things would happen. One, people would get accounts, use bots to level it up to level 30. Then they would go into the game and they would either using a bot or at the time, more often a person would log in and play ranked and rank level up in ranked. And if you level up in ranked to a certain point, you got different levels. And those levels were signified by the border on your load screen. And so when you go into the game and play with your friends, they would see that border. And so, and that was very sought after.
Interesting.
And so some people would buy it and which caused all sorts of problems because half the time the accounts were loaded up with other things. And then they would use stolen credit cards to load them up.
Yeah.
Or now crossover into account takeover, or they would just watch, see who's got that high level account. And then they would fish and hack and, mostly social engineer.
Yeah.
And get the account, take the account over. Or they would do different scams like, hey, get free Riot points. And then sometimes it'd be they would just load it with a stolen credit card. Other times they would get you to give them your account information. They would log in. And, these fraudsters are good business people. So they would log into your account. And, the first 1,000 accounts they do this to, they log in, they maybe use a good credit card. But now the next 20,000 accounts, they use stolen credit cards. And half of those they steal, change your password, and they sell that account.
Yeah. So I used to, back in like 2007, 8, and 9-ish range, somewhere in there, I think it was mostly 8, I would play World of Warcraft. And I would travel a lot with my girlfriend at the time. And so we were always just sitting in hotels, nothing to do. This was way before Netflix was running around. And so we would play World of Warcraft. And there was those scams were always around, like, here, I'll give you 5,000 gold, if you on eBay and all that, and all the little underground websites. And then the same thing was happening, which I think, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we go into the account takeover side, but then getting accounts at the time when level 70 was as high as you could go, there'd be accounts that were 70, and then they'd sell the account for a bunch of money to somebody else, so that person didn't have to do all the work. I mean, it took like 30 in-game days in order to get this account to 70. It took a long time. And then obviously, it's going to have gold. It's going to have like all the mounts and everything you need. And I got really, like, I quit doing regular WoW and started blue in the arena. So it's just kind of what League of Legends became, all arena style stuff. But so I definitely have seen that sort of thing happen. And I still see, I think the same thing happens like on a lot of these like pay to win games, like it's Clash of Clans, Fallout Shelter. Fallout Shelter was really easy. I beat that thing like just like hanging out on the couch in the evenings in like less than a month. But definitely identify with that. Yeah.
That's the thing. So, when I say like it's not always money, there would be one of the hardest problems to tackle was that, these players would log in and play and they would level up these accounts. And those were generally really good players that would do that. And, so when there's an issue with, competitive integrity, if you're a low level player and you get matched, which was one of the great things about League at the time too, is that it had a really good match queue. So you played with people your skill level.
Yeah.
But if someone's logging into a stolen or botted account that's low level and they're logging in 2 level it up to sell it, well, that player's better than you. And so it becomes a bloodbath. And it's not fun.
Yeah. Could you level down too? Like if your character went up to like whatever level, could it go back down?
Yeah, it degrades over time.
Yeah, because so I used to play Halo 2 way back in the day too. Geez, I played more games than I realized. But you could go like 50 was a level cap there, but it would be like a moon. I remember one time I got it all the way up to like I was getting the partial moon, so I was like in the high 40s. But if I was to sell my account or someone was to take it over and they really sucked, I mean, that thing would just nosedive down.
If I'm not 100% sure, I don't remember, but it does degrade, but it took a long time.
Yeah.
I think it's faster nowadays, but that's the thing. So, so it was such a challenge to beat this because, those guys say those are Smurfs, but then on the other side, you had the players that, they would get this account and they'd get it leveled up. And the reason for it wasn't about money. It was to show off to their friends, to say, hey, I'm platinum, and then And we actually did some, I'm not going to go into the details because I don't want to give away secrets here to the fraudsters that are listening to this. But I did find a really good way with a couple data science guys to stop a lot of that for at least for a while. But it was interesting, and talking about Brazil earlier, we launched this system, and boom, we killed a ton of Smurfs and people that were better players logging into other accounts, and it worked great for most of the world except Brazil. And what we found out,
except Brazil. It's always except Brazil.
Yeah, so I fly down to Brazil and talking to the team down there, and the first thing they say, well, why didn't you talk to us more about this? And I thought it was just a global problem I was trying to solve. And they said, yeah, but you don't understand Brazil well enough. And I said, obviously, I admit that now. And so we're talking about it. They said, oh yeah, here, watch this YouTube video. And they're based, they had this thing called the Platinum Heart. So in the States and in Western Europe and most of the world, people would either buy a account that was leveled up, or they would pay somebody to play in their account to level the account up. And then that would be in ranked. But then once they got to platinum or whatever they wanted to be, they would never play ranked again, because you would still have the border.
They'd be locked in. It'd be locked in with
for the season. But that's how it worked. It only lasts the season. So for the season, they're platinum. So if I did that, I would never log in to ranked again, because I would lose it. I am not platinum. Well, in Brazil, what the guys were telling me is that, oh no, that's not how we work. We feel like we are platinum. So, but there's a problem. Our internet's bad, our ping's too low. And at the time, there wasn't a Brazil server. I think we were just launching it at the time. So they had to play in the States, so their ping was like 200. And good ping was like 20.
And that's where people get really pissed too on the other side of the game. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they would log back into rank as platinum and they'd get crushed. But my models didn't work based on that. And so, it's like that kind of thing that really throws you for a loop whenever you're used to dealing with people that it's mostly all about money and fraud. Most of the time it is, but sometimes it's not. And I find that every video game company I've ever worked with, as a client, a consultant, or worked for, it's the same thing. There's some element of this to it. And you have to remember that. If you don't, you're not going to, you're going to have problems.
Yeah, and I think that's granted. I'm talking about this a whole lot too on my podcast again and again and again, and all my speeches, all this stuff. Like I went up to last year. I went up to Seattle to do that thing with Riskified, but policy abuses too. It's not about monetary gain always. It's about there's something else, another goal that they're trying to get. Could be monetary if it's like rewards and things like that, but it could be like a medallion status on like an airline or some sort of like
same idea.
It's just some sort of status that they're trying to get, and it's not. And usually these aren't necessarily always criminals too. They're like regular people, just people that want to shortcut somewhere, and that's. I think that like I just did a couple of different articles about the 2023 predictions. One of them with Identique that came out last week. And I think I'm going to do a couple more things that are upcoming, a couple of webinars and events. But the focus on policy abuse for 2023 for me is just as big, if not a little bit bigger, than what my normal fraud prevention focus is roping in policy abuse, because like there's so much money bleed coming out of the sides on policy abuse that we need to really start enforcing these concrete rules. Like there was such a focus all through the pandemic of getting like acquiring customers and keeping those customers and keeping them loyal, that now now that we've done it, now like we want to keep them loyal, but we also want to shake off the ones that are costing us money, because sometimes customers don't make you money, sometimes they cost you money. So you need to really be aware of the lifetime value of your customers and what you're doing to acquire those customers. So just things to think about, everybody, as we go through this. Okay, so you had mentioned other gaming companies. So Riot Games, I'm sure there's an infinite number of stories there, and they are a juggernaut. They will be for a long time to come. But you worked for a couple other gaming studios too, didn't you?
Yeah, well, so like I said, I was with Riot for about 5 years, and then I left Riot. And what I pretty much did my whole career is, if I'm not working for a merchant, I'm consulting for merchants. And so I say I never really lose that merchant hat. I can't not think like a merchant. And so I did some consulting, and really quickly, within months of leaving Riot, I got a call from a former Rioter, as we called ourselves, that was working at Epic. And Epic, if most people know Epic nowadays, but if not, they're the makers of Fortnite. And my friend had joined them from Riot and was helping with publishing. And he called me up and said, "Hey, same problems. We don't have."
Again, it was rapid growth, and they didn't quite know what to expect on that. But
yeah, and it was the same as Riot too. They would say, "Oh, they're not going to shut us down. We're too big." But I've seen the brands and the people lose merchant accounts that are making hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah, it doesn't matter how big you are. And so yeah, they had the same problems. And so as a consultant, I consulted for Epic for about 2 or 3 years.
Oh wow.
Same stuff, just and a little more on the payment side. Like I did a lot of the fraud and slowly optimized and got it down so they were outside of the Visa MasterCard programs. But also helped a lot with payments and just optimizing that process, because people don't realize Epic's not a new company. They've been around for a long time. Like I don't remember when they started it, but 20 something years, because they mostly published and did games for like the consoles.
Yeah, they started in 91. They started
this cross console thing, which was newer to the world really, with Fortnite. And so they had a lot of the same problems Riot had, and so I helped them with that. And then I also helped them with some of the cross-platform stuff and how that was a different challenge, right? How do you stop fraud when you're not the one controlling the shots all the time, right? If you have cross-platform, you have money coming from different sources. You have players coming from different sources. You have different, consoles have a solid, reputable device ID, internet, and it's across the internet, but that console is hard-coded. So there's good things there, but it's also bad because you can't see everything that the console companies have. You can't see all their data.
They probably want
all your data in your company.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting. I never thought about that, like how consoles could be a little quote safer for the most part, but at the same time you don't get the level of data you get on like a PC. And then PC gaming has gotten so big lately, but I've been a real big fan of this cross-platform thing. Like I think
it's great.
I have both the consoles. I don't do PC gaming, but I was just saying the other like I just got a PS5 finally. Thank you, Eamon, for helping me obtain that. But I had a Xbox One X, so the one before the Series X. I had just so many things, and I just have been playing one of the Assassin's Creed games. So now in my older days, I like single player, open world, go at my own pace games. And I want to move everything over to the PS5, but Ubisoft on that particular game, they started with the newer Assassin's Creed games. On the older one, Origins, they don't have cross-platform. So all my progress and everything is stuck forever on the Xbox, and I don't get to move it over to the new PS5. That's kind of frustrating. But I think the cross game, like especially with like the Call of Duties, all these like regular games that a lot of people know and play for forever and ever and ever, they've all moved to the cross-platform thing to get the money everywhere they can. And I think like stories like Epic Games where they have like Fortnite, where you never know who's playing on what when they're in a match with you is super interesting. But that does open up a lot of sources for problems as the revenue comes in from different angles as well.
Yeah, really. Yeah, it's interesting because just all that, and like I said, then when you talk about more of the world we tend to play with fraud and payments and stuff, it's like data is such a big component of what we do, especially if we're doing any good with it. But if you don't have access to all of it, it's a problem.
Yeah,
like when Epic launched, I probably shouldn't even say which game. They launched a big game on the Epic Game Store, and everyone knows they do free for a little while, and then it goes to paid when they bring some of the new app. And I remember sitting in meetings telling the console people, we have to have a two-way communication here on fraud. If you get a chargeback, or if I get a chargeback, or I being Epic in this case, whoever gets the chargeback needs to tell everybody else, especially me, because I'm the one in the middle. We're the coordinator. And so, if Epic gets a chargeback and, the console company doesn't know, what's going to happen? The fraudsters are going to figure this out.
So how would that work? As I'm a little curious, because I know for me in my closed ecosystem in my own companies, and I've done marketplaces before, but the difference that I had where I was the marketplace in those instances was there was clients that were part of the marketplace, but I was still the merchant of record. And then on the back end, we would do settlement files to move the money behind the scenes. But at the end of the day, all the sales came through me. Now, when I buy a game on PlayStation, I buy that from PlayStation. So then obviously you guys got to get your money on the back end, like probably just the same way, invoices and all that. But if I charge back that game on the PlayStation, PlayStation gets the chargebacks. You don't. So you guys might not know something was charged back. So you would have to have that communication. But at the same time, like, what about charging back on an Xbox or on a PC? You're right. Like, so can you talk about, like, how did you solve for that? Like what?
Yeah, eventually. Like I advocated for it day one. It did not get solved. It didn't happen quickly. Eventually it did happen though.
Yeah, because I would want, if I had somebody on a PlayStation charging back, I would then want any of their Epic stuff that's on the PC to be messed with too. Now I'm a little interested. Like I had some problems. I had some, like, what an old PayPal friend helped me out, but when Fallout 76 was releasing years ago, and that was kind of a nightmare that made headlines there. I'm a really big Fallout fan. What?
I also helped Bethesda.
Oh, okay. So I'm a big Fallout fan. There's a little lunchbox up there that has my Fallout stuff. So big Fallout fan. So I was all about 76. And the problems that had happened with that led it to not getting my game on release day. And it wasn't going to come for several weeks because I ordered directly from Bethesda, by the way. And so I don't remember, something happened where I had called PlayStation. I'm like, hey, this is happening. Is I bought it again on PlayStation, or something had happened. I don't remember anymore. But what happened is, on the PlayStation to me side, something had happened. And I called them. I was like, hey, can we fix this? And they said no. So I issued a chargeback specifically for that game to try and get their attention. And I know Bernard's probably like wincing right now if he's listening to this, knowing that I did this. But obviously, yeah, he's a good guy. Obviously, it locked my entire PlayStation account forever and ever and ever. And I thought, like, it was frustrating to me because I only had a problem with that one thing. And I buy a lot of PlayStation games. I'm probably the perfect customer because I buy games and then I don't play them. I'm like, I'll play like an hour and then, like, I just don't have the time. I get this podcast. I have a regular day job. I have play guitar.
I'm the
like,
same way.
I have a ton of things that I have to do with my normal life, so I don't get a whole lot of gaming time. But also at the same time, like, I'll buy a game and it's not quite what I wanted, or it's too difficult, like too over the top. I can't, like games that you have to like feed your player and stuff. I don't have time for that. Like, I want to play, I want to shoot some arrows, I want to shoot a gun, and then I want to move on with my life. But anyway, so I think we're at this weird spot in gaming specifically where if we have a grievance with an individual piece of a platform, it needs to be segmented out from the overall platform. So if I bought 100 games, but this one just doesn't work and they refuse to help me out with that, like, I have a right to try and get my money back. That's the original real reason that chargebacks existed. Like, a company can't sell me a product that doesn't work and then say, go F yourself. Like, that's why this remediation process was invented. Now it's being abused over the top, but at the same time, like, I need to be able to have a way to stand up for myself on a very specific thing and know that my 100 games that I've purchased are still going to exist. So that's just the gaming industry that's listening. Please continue to work on that too.
Definitely. And that's something I'm working with a couple startup game companies right now. And those are the kind of things, like, one thing I'm probably best known on the consulting side, at least, for getting companies out of the Visa, MasterCard chargeback programs. Like, I've saved numerous companies doing that. And one thing I'm trying to do a little bit more nowadays is help newer companies, ones that aren't in trouble yet. Because it's like, this is so much easier to solve for if you solve for it in the beginning than solving for when you're, in the ER. And so that's something I'm always talking about, and I think for what you're saying, in my opinion, that's a really difficult thing to solve for, right? Because you charged back, you're talking about, Bernard and Sony. So you charged back Sony. So
Sony
you didn't
got
charge
mad
back
at me.
that game.
Yeah.
Because there's no entity for that game, that's Sony. And so in one case, I see definitely lock it, because then you'll be motivated to fix it. But flip side, and this is something that I think it was always part of my way of thinking, but it was driven home to me at Riot, was that, think about player first. What's the player experience? And because I remember when I got to Riot, same Epic as well, if you did a chargeback, they did not lock your account. Basically nothing happened. There was no punishment for that person chargeback. Now I convinced them to do things, but the thing is, it was actually a really hard sell. And we eventually compromised, and I think which was a good thing, is, you don't, for one chargeback at a low amount, I think where we ended up at Riot was not locking the account right away, but
You
basically trying
guys, I
to get the
remember
customer.
you guys had asked for reimbursements on things too, if I
Yeah.
remember correctly. Yeah.
And actually, that's, I think, where we landed, which I really liked in the end. I think they still do this, is that, yeah, the account would get locked. And this isn't what you're talking about. This isn't cross-platform, and this isn't cross-game. This is, when I was there was no.
Yeah, this
there was
is a
only one game.
singular thing. So
Yeah.
now they got Valorant, which is huge too.
Yeah.
But
so that's a little different.
yeah.
But yeah, we had it so where you could actually pay back.
So-
or if you could prove that it was real fraud, somebody actually did hack your account, that's another story. And then they now, I just helped a friend of mine get his account back that was hacked. And they now have an automated system, which works most of the time. Not always.
So
but, yeah.
Let me tell you how I would solve it and how I have solved this particular situation at companies in the past. So I was at a gift card exchange company at one of my past for a year. Now, we as a company had, obviously, people would charge back specific gift cards, not always claim fraud, but just 13.1s, those sorts of things. But our solution there was to suspend the account, take back the item, the single item, and not allow any future purchases. So if you had other items still stored on there, you could still use them. So if you had other gift cards that you had that, I mean, there always risk a chance that those gift cards that could get charged back additionally, but at the end of the day, the account was suspended and blocked from future purchases. And then you could still use what you had purchased, but you couldn't make more. And you couldn't use the one that you had disputed. So I think that would work well for games. Now, if you want to then unlock your account for future purchases, then you have the reimbursement thing, or you have to plead the case, blah, 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 blah. Now,
so here's where that gets challenging, though, is because, and this is where, again, I say, what I would love to do, any companies out there that are earlier in this process, I love to help companies solve for this before they have the problem, because the problem you get into is that depending on the model, how it works, especially because of microtransactions, if you buy some in-game or in whatever points, you're buying the points, you're not buying the game.
Yeah.
And then to trace, okay, which chargeback it went to this set of virtual currency, and then you bought these 12 things, but half of this one
you take it all back,
wasn't that one. And and so if it's designed well with this in mind, it's not that hard. If it's not, and it's not, I'm not saying that this is poor design. It's just, if you weren't thinking about this problem, it's almost impossible. And we did do that. Actually, we started to do that somewhat at Riot. And Epic does that, or at least used to do that as well, where we would, de-entitle things like that. But like I say, because of virtual currency, since you're not specifically buying that game, it gets difficult.
Yeah, now, and I could see
like PlayStation or something, when you're buying a game, that makes more sense. And I think, I've never consulted for Sony, but give me a call, Bernard. No, I think what really with them in that situation, I think that would be the ideal thing, is to just entitle for that game. But then again, too, maybe what if you bought more than one thing on your cart? There's all sorts of variables there. And if they're not set up that way, it'd be really difficult.
And one of the things too, like on marketplaces, like I think that would be like a Sony or like a Microsoft, where like I'm buying a game that then they have to then transfer money over to that publisher at the time, on the back end, is you could how do you say it? Disentitle access to that game. And then if the chargeback is lost, so then the PlayStation would be out the money that I then cost them. You have to have this built in at the beginning, and I've chased this down on new contracts as they renew, but then to have a deduction from the future settlement based on that to reimburse Sony, make Sony whole, because technically Sony shouldn't be out the money on something on this side, so it comes out. Now those, like, depending on when you sign your agreements, like if you're a new company that has a marketplace, I definitely recommend that you put in some sort of legal language that allows you to deduct if there are customer facing issues from the future settlements of your clients. It just makes it a smoother process overall. Now they're not going to like it, but that's, they need to have some risk too. Like there can't be all upside all the time for everybody that's using your system as like a gateway to the world. That's just my opinion. So
no, I agree. I think there definitely needs to be better ways to that. And again, like I said, with player first is think about the customer experience. We do need to think about the fraudster experience, but more importantly, we got to think about the players. And just and I like, outside of video games, just if you can't make, and I've said this a lot, if you can't make a decision that's good for your customer, it's probably not the right decision.
Interesting.
In the end, they are the people that you're trying to serve. And so, the best, and that's something I love about Riot. And, I assume they still do this, is that if it was not good for the player, it generally didn't happen. And so we tried very hard, like with the repayment thing, and to still fight fraud and beat the fraudsters, but also keep everything good for the players too.
So let's talk about what you're doing now to help other companies do that very thing.
Sure. Yeah, well, a lot of it was what you just said. So I started after my account in Equifax days, where I built a BMPI facilitator, and then account absorbed us, and was there for about a year and a half, and then left after that Equifax acquisition. Took about a year off, and then after that, about a year ago, really, I started a new company called CNPMentors, and really the mission there is kind of what we started this conversation with, is around education. It's like, we do consulting, but I really do want to educate people. We're trying to get more and more content out there around this industry, the things people don't know, or you don't know what you don't know. And so what we've just started this year, or launching right now, is an idea that there's so many companies that need help with this stuff. If you don't know payments or fraud, or you've never dealt with it, or even if you have, there's so much to keep track of. And so, it's my belief, a company needs to stick with a core competency. If you're a video game, you don't need to be an expert on payments. You might eventually need people internally, but we can help you set up the right way in the first place. But what we're trying to do is, along with having, the more high-end side of consulting, where we get you out of the piece of MasterCard programs, like I don't think I've ever failed to getting a company out of one, unless they won't listen. There's a few of those. If they don't listen, you can't help them.
Yeah.
But so what we're trying to do is, along with having those kind of programs, we're also creating an online portal, which is going to have a lot of content around it, how to solve all these kind of problems, and almost like kind of online courses, but a little less formal. And then kind of the next step up, and I'm seeing the need for this a lot more in a lot of the companies I've consulted with recently, is more of a coaching program. So if you're a company that needs help, and you don't want someone to just come, just parachute in and do it for you and leave, but instead you want to, say, train up your staff. Maybe it's new staff members even. Or if you're in the middle of a problem and you want to solve it, but you want help, you want to be coached through it. And then, still, if you want us to jump in and do something, we will. But if not, at a much lower cost, we're doing more of a coaching program where we have weekly calls with you, talk about whatever you want, answer questions, and then also have access to us via email. And it's seeming like this is going to be a really good way to further educate people and the industry, and all those merchants out there, but also still be able to help people that are in big trouble and keep providing that educational content.
Yeah, excellent there. What else are you guys doing?
And then, so additionally, we talked a little bit earlier, so my wife's part of the team now, my partner in all this, and together we're going to be starting I wouldn't call it a podcast, maybe more of a show on YouTube that is talk about these kind of things, but in a much more broader sense. And that, what I realized from some conversations I had recently is that, it's odd as it is for me to say, I've been doing this 20 something years. And so I literally was on the internet before it had much commerce. And I remember sitting in school, in college, in the computer lab, getting onto Yahoo. And, there wasn't much you could buy. But my first company I worked for was doing e-commerce before the fraud vendors were out there, and before any of us were there. And so what we're going to try to do is kind of bridge bring in some history, bring in those of us who've done this a long time. So learn from our experiences, and also what it was like before, but then also talk to the future, what's coming, talk to people newer in the space, what they're seeing, new products, whatever's going on. And just try to make it kind of fun and interesting. There'll definitely be some deep and tactical conversations, but also just more, the history, because we need to learn from it. Things go in cycles. And so I think it'll be an interesting and entertaining show that we're going to be doing that toward the end of this month. and it's going to be called Ecom Evolving, just through a tiny little website up, ecomevolving.com. So hopefully people tune in and check it out.
Yeah. We always need another podcast in this space. Just saying.
Definitely.
Can I give you like 2 little small pieces of podcast advice that I've learned by crash coursing myself into podcast world? First of all, if someone or a lot of people tell you that an episode is really useful and them and their companies get a lot of value out of it, don't go and delete the episode. Just because you have a personal dispute with somebody. So don't do that because you can't delete it from everywhere and people still find it, but I'll just go and re-record it somewhere else. But also audio equipment, don't skimp out on audio equipment. I use the Shure SM7B. I did not start this podcast with a Shure SM7B. And I use the Cloud Lifter, which gives the super clear audio. I can't recommend this particular mic. With the Cloud Lifter, XLR mics are just the best. They sound so good on everything. So it's a little expensive. It's like $400 for the mic, but if you put it up even against like the MV7, like the Shure SM7B will blow it out of the water every time.
Check that out. Yeah, I've got a Elgato. I don't remember the model.
Cat.
I don't remember which model it is, but I think it sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, right, your audio right now, using it right now.
Yeah,
your audio sounds really good. Like you
just can't see it. Let's see.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, the noise gate and everything sounds good. The audio is really clear on that. So yeah, I'm just saying, like that's like the difference. Like I've been reading a lot of stuff about like comparing because I'm building a road kit for this too. So like I can take it out there. I'm trying to decide if I want to like get a little bit of a cheaper mic, and the answer is no. I'm gonna go and get another one of these, and then take it on the road. I'm gonna do some stuff while I'm at some of the conferences, try and get people on the side and see if we can bang out a couple episodes, more in real time. Some of the people that live in like Australia and stuff. I have an episode coming out in a couple of days with a fella in New Zealand, and that audio is fine on that one there. But like some of the folks, if they're in more low bandwidth areas, the audio can be a little challenging when we record these. So I'm going to grab those people while they're in the States and see if we can just do some in-person stuff. So those are my 2 things. Great. Don't delete episodes that are useful and good audio quality.
All right. Well, hopefully I'll not have trouble with either of those, but those are good. Thank you.
So as we begin to wrap up here, we got a couple of things. So you have this company that you're helping people out. So in your opinion, what are the biggest issues that merchants are facing right now that need to be solved?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and it's really funny how they're all the same issues. And some new ones, but it's more like new twists on the same
thing. Like exactly. It's like a variation of the same thing that we see in people just trying to find out ways around other things, but it's always the same core issues, always.
Yeah, like I'll throw out right. So probably I think one of the top ones still, and I don't see this changing, is chargebacks. But because if you think about it, like say new twist, we have so many new merchants because of COVID, and all these people that thought they would never be online or didn't want to be online are now online. And so you've got all these new, targets for the fraudsters. I think that's still a problem. And on top of that, the rules keep changing. And I'm always, something I talk about a lot is reminding people that so often, we give new merchant accounts and we don't tell them of their rules. That you can't have so many chargebacks. And it's not any different now than it was 20 years ago when I got my first merchant accounts. Nobody told me what a chargeback was. Nobody told me I had to stay under, at the time, 1%, which that's changed now. It's 0.9 or in some
0.9 on Visa. Yeah. 1 on the others for now.
Yeah. In some ways it's 0.75 because that's where
that's where the risk. Yeah. The threshold. That's where you start getting nasty emails from your processor. But
and oftentimes the processor doesn't explain. I'm helping a friend, not a client really, but a friend of mine, with when he got a chargeback on a tour company he runs, and it's like $3,000, and he said, "Well, but she took the tour. How can she charge this back?" I said, "Well, the code says that she's claiming that it was fraud, that she didn't do it." He says, "Well, I have pictures and everything." And so, okay, well, that's part of what you submit, but you have a signature. It was a tour. It was in person. No, he processed it, card not present, and has no signature. And so there's all that. Again, if you knew the things going in, you could prevent them. I think a second thing that also has been around, but it's more newer is, and I've been talking about for a long time too, is account security. But right now, I think it seems to be even a really hot topic. And what I've been saying, if you've watched any of my LinkedIn Live stuff lately, is that we need to remember, we need to think back, like, think about back whenever CVV came out and card code came out. No one wanted to do it. Everyone thought it would tank their conversion rates. Well, eventually, the world was able to educate. Once merchants started doing it and enforcing it, now it's everywhere. Nobody had a problem with it.
Yeah.
And I think
that's what
needs to happen with account security.
Yeah, like the EMV, remember the dip the chip at the cash registers, like they were fighting that, like it was just going to ruin everything. And it's all been fine. That's just what we're all used to now. You just have to force it, and then people get used to it. Like one of the the episode that's going to come out directly before this one. By the time this episode out, everybody hopefully you've already listened to it. But we talk about the different types of 2FA that Auth Signal, the company Auth Signal, is doing, and how they can help out with this part specifically based on the level of friction that a merchant might want to have. So that's
and so something that I preach, and I've been saying this for years, but I think it's very, very relevant now, is that you don't, one, like email verification, everyone expects that now. That's not a big deal. So just do it. Stop worrying about your conversion rate around that. But then then you step it up, and as you step up to different levels of authentication, it doesn't have to be when they create their account. It can be, I like to call it gating. It can be at different gates. So it could be, like if you're a video game company, obviously you want people to play your game. So if you're free to play, they don't need to enter a credit card when they start, most likely. So don't ask for the higher level authentication. But once they get to, say, a certain level, once they make a purchase, of a certain amount, just think about it in terms of psychology. When is the consumer or the player willing to do something for you? Well, it's whenever you've given them a bunch of things. So let them love your game, let them love your product, and then start to protect the account. Or but flip side, if you're a bank, and this annoys me to no end, I'm not going to name and shame here, but like my bank, they have the most secure you can get is SMS two-factor auth. Yeah. And it's not required. And they solve security questions. So it's like, guys, come on. This is all my money is here. Yeah. I will do things for you. I will do Google Authenticator or something more advanced. So we need, I think as people in the space, as experts, and also as, if you're a merchant, we're all part of this ecosystem. We need to protect it. And so it's my feeling that if maybe we start slow, maybe we mostly do it via gating, but we need to do it. We need to offer two-factor auth that's strong.
I think Apple's doing a really good job of forcing these new types of what people don't even really realize is 2FA, like with the touch IDs and the Face IDs and the biometrics. That's
a captive audience.
Yeah, but like at the same time, like having banks and things add that in as an authentication to log in is like kind of adding an enhanced layer of security that most people don't realize they're even doing. And that's pretty cool. But it's one of those things, like if you just make people do it, they do it. Like they adopt it. Like we don't have to pretend that a 5% drop off is as huge as it might actually be, because people probably are going to abandon cart anyway when they see the price. So just like,
yeah. And what worry about something I've been talking about a lot lately too, and I'm going to do this more and more, is just around the idea that, really, when you think about it, what we do, especially like what my company does, is we improve lifetime value, right? So it's not just around fraud. And really, if you're doing the fraud job and payments job, in my opinion, the right way, you're trying to enhance your company, improve your company. So you're improving the player experience, you're improving the customer experience, you're enhancing the LTV. And oddly, most people don't even track LTV, but the more we do that, the better. And you can optimize. People don't generally use that word in this industry, but you can optimize fraud.
Yeah, that's so funny because like two companies that I've worked at, only two have we ever like had a running LTV of the customer, and like you can set like gates for your whales, the people that have been there a long time. Like if someone has spent $1 million with me in the last 6 months and they charge back $39.99, we're not going to have as much of a problem that someone spent $39.99 and charged back $39.99 with me.
Yeah, I just saw I just did actually a LinkedIn Live yesterday I did was around this, and that somebody, I just saw one of our other friends in the space had posted something around a guy his kid got a hold of his phone, or actually gave him his phone to play a game. And across the next hour, the kid racks up a couple $1,000s of food bills, or, food purchases.
Oh, this is the one I saw this on. Did I see this on your post on LinkedIn, or was it?
I did it post around a couple times. Another guy posted it too.
Yeah.
But I did a video around it and a big post around it, because this goes right to what we're talking about. Why did you let this guy order 50 pizzas?
Yeah.
It's like, I get it. You want that big order. But as I preach to people all the time, if you don't know where that sale came from, if you don't know why you have this big sales boost, there's a reason. And it's probably fraud. And so why wouldn't you have something there? Behavioral biometrics would have solved that problem also. But even keep it simple, just a simple rule. If it's more than 3 pizzas or 5, look at your data. If it's more than the vast average, the high average is, or maybe the highest you've ever had that was legitimate, put a gate there, make them authenticate better, make them call you. If you want 50 pizzas, let them order it.
Yeah, but step up into 3D secure, so you get the liability shift on that one. I know, I would go further. 3 cents on that.
I would call them if it's literally if it's 50.
That's something that comes back to the balancing too, of balancing human interaction versus how much can we automate all of this. I think that in the modern era with speed, we're all trying so hard for automation, but there are always going to be exceptions to the rule. I think even selling movie tickets or big tickets like the Super Bowl, if someone's going to buy $100,000 ticket and you've never seen it before, it might be worth a quick phone call just to be like, hey, are you really him? Are you really her? Sorry, I'm using pronouns, but are you really them? We really should know, and it takes only a couple of seconds to validate some information and then move on with our lives, but at the same time, I think that using these multi-layered approaches with step-up authentication on a case-by-case basis is really where people really need to go. You don't have to call it email authentication every time. You don't have to call biometrics every time, but you get that whole cascading effect of when you do, and that's how you really get into having low friction environments for almost all of your customers with a high conversion rate and a low chargeback rate. But you have to spend the time and you have to do it and map it out, and you have to it has to keep evolving because your customers evolve, so your process and your strategy has to evolve too. So
definitely, it's always got to be changing, because that's what somebody asked me a question yesterday. They were saying, well, with things like all the AI tools coming out lately, is that going to mean that we don't have promo codes anymore because it's just too easy to fake and stuff? And I said, no, it's not going to change it. It's going to change the world in some ways, sure, but there's always going to be fraud. Fraud's always been an arms race, right? You don't the old joke, and the stupid joke in our space is, right, if you don't want any fraud, don't take payments. And that works. But you don't make no money. So it's the same thing. You've got to continue to evolve. It's an arms race. You stop one problem, it evolves, just like our products evolve, just our services evolve. So we have to evolve as people and as professionals, and our businesses have to keep evolving. If they don't, they're going to die.
Yep. Okay, we got one more thing, because this is technically, we're combining this, everybody, with what his company is solving for, also addressing the three top trends that I ask everybody. So this is kind of a combined, everybody. So we got one more on your list, and I think it's a good one.
Back to friendly fraud. I think we've been talking about that half the show, really. And the name keeps changing on what this is, but I think and people ask a lot. They say, well, what percentage is friendly fraud versus criminal fraud? So, well, where are you in your journey with fraud?
Yeah.
If you have no protection, which surprisingly more and more merchants I run into don't have much, then it's a lot. Then say, let's call it half is friendly fraud, half is criminal. But it overlaps too. What's criminal versus not. But so what I like to call the definition kind of a friendly fraud being that it's somebody as a merchant. So they've bought something from you, they've had an account for a long time, or kind of in quotes, it looks like that person. So this is where account takeover jumps in. So it could be criminal fraud that looks like friendly fraud, or let's just combine the two in that case. So I think that, especially what I just said about AI, is going to get more and more prevalent. It's going to be harder and harder to tell the difference between a criminal fraudster and an average person.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so, that's not going away. That's just going to get worse and worse. And so just the same statement, we have to keep evolving.
Yes, we do every day, all the time. And I think like, like chat GPT is like just literally everywhere right now on everything. And it's frightening. I think it's frightening for a lot of people what it's able to do. And of course it's AI, so it's learning even more. But at the same time, like we can't just throw our hands up and say it's all over now, like these things are going to keep coming and we're going to keep finding ways to solve for what we need to do. I think there's some really interesting tech that's coming out in the marketplace too that's going to be interesting for us to use that leverages AI in a more sophisticated way than historically we've been using just training models again and again and again. So I think that over the next couple of years,
AI has the ability, I think, kind of like in a way, it's a much more advanced, unsupervised machine learning kind of, the problem with machine learning most of the time is that it has to be, you've got to implement that model. It may be learning the whole time, but it's not active. The newest stuff isn't active the whole time. Whereas AI has a better ability to do that. And I don't think there's not much out there that really does that in our space right now.
There's one company that I won't name yet that is doing it right now, and I'm going to have them on as a guest shortly in the next couple of months, but they are using ML to train their own ML against itself. And I think that is a super interesting approach. So they're using AI to pretend it's itself a bad guy while attacking its own ML to learn, and they're learning from each other. And it's a super interesting thing. And I'm going to have them talk about it on the podcast because I think it might be a larger, because it's not just going to sell for fraud. They're looking at like bot mitigation and account authentication as well. So I think that there's going to be, and they also have some deep fake stuff that they're working on too.
Interesting. So, it's like, one thing I see that, along with friendly fraud is that just, I think more and more, behavioral biometrics, those kind of things, I think are super useful and they're evolving and changing fast. I'm talking to one company I shouldn't name right now, but is doing that where it's pretty much exactly what, I think needs to be done is that, more things need to be, say, biometric first, behavioral first, because really, we only have so much data. If you just look at transaction data, it's all the same stuff and it's generally the same things. And those are much easier to fake. Whereas, if you start further up the funnel, if you think, broaden our scope here a little bit, look at the sales page, the order page, how did they get
that's so funny
there? And then all the behavioral biometrics variables in that process.
I've been saying for years that we need to get our authentication up closer to the login or even the touch point of the website. So by the time the people wind up at checkout, they're authenticated and they didn't realize that they were authenticated. So however they're interacting with the site, like it goes beyond just like time on page, that the simple static rules that we've already been using, but like all of the things like how the accelerometer data is being held. I know like companies like New Data have been trying to do this and get a real clear snapshot of like a person's, how they walk, how they talk, how they sound, however, all the data points that we can get. But I think really at the end of the day, if we can find a way to get real, true biometric authentication and liability shifts in some of these things, like if there's a way that we could get a liability shift from us to more of an issuer side, or have the ability, like it's completely removed, like you can't dispute a transaction completely because they know it was you, even the bank knows it was you. So they're like, no liability here. That's where like we'll finally hit our stride, but that's going to take lobbying to the government, to create rules.
That's a long way off. But I do think, I'm working with a company right now to do kind of what I just described, where, you want to getting behavioral and other variables from the whole customer journey instead of just the login or just the order page and just transaction data. And so it's like, these are the kind of things that, the more we do that, the better. I think if we look at the big picture instead of just a little microcosm that we tend to look at, I think we can get much further in what we're doing. And especially, like I said, with all the evolving, everybody evolving, the fraud world evolving, and friendly fraud is just going to get better and better. So, harder and harder to stop.
And so consumers are harder and harder to please.
True. But also that, but now go back to the side, like I say, enhancing lifetime value. And that, I think we fail to talk about that way too much when we talk about fraud and payments. If you take this further up the funnel, then you're gathering more and more data you could be using also on the marketing side too. And, and this doesn't mean invading your privacy. This can all be, metadata that gets stored. And so, I don't want it to sound like I'm saying that we need to, have a whole lot more personal data stored. Because no, actually, I would say less. Because we take this stuff, we distill it down, so it's not at all personal, but yet it gives us insights so we can stop fraud and better provide what the consumers do want.
That's a good point. All right. Well, I think we are going to wrap this one up. This was a really good and really fun conversation. Learned a lot about gaming. It validates all the stuff that I had seen, that I wasn't alone when I was seeing it, when I was playing these games, when I was the end user on that. And I think that we have a pretty good idea looking forward into the future, what we both want from our industry, and what the goal that we're working towards. So I really like to hear that too. I do like, I want to make sure that everybody goes and checks out your podcast when you get it going. So I'll post about it. Just let me know when you launch that, and I'll post about it on the good old LinkedIn. Try and put some eyes over there. But for everybody else, I'm going to put all the links to Scott in the description, obviously, for his company. So if you guys have any needs or any coaching needs for him, like, feel free to reach out, ping him. He'll get you all set up on that. However they do the agreements, however you guys can do the agreements. But I think that that'll be super interesting if you have needs. I think it's cool to do a thing like that, like coaching, where it's not necessarily like full-blown consulting, but more helping people along in their journey. So that's a really cool idea, and I'm happy that you're doing that. And thank you again for being a guest on here.
Thank you. Yes, one other thing too, just thinking about it. So something else we're doing a lot too is trying about every week to do a live Q&A, where technically I'll teach something if people don't ask enough questions. But I've been doing them for about a month now, and most of the time, at least half of the hour is full of people asking me questions, and I'm answering questions.
That's excellent.
That's
good that people are involved, because it's hard to get, like, on webinars and things like that. It's usually when they say, like, anybody have any questions, it's fairly silent. It's gonna be like onesie twosies. Like, one person will ask like 3 questions. But it's really, if you get an interactive audience like that, like, that's where people really start to learn, because it prompts people's minds to come up with questions too. Like, oh yeah, I was thinking about something similar to that. So when you get that, that's good. So everybody, make sure you also go connect with and follow Scott on LinkedIn too, so you can get access to those wonderful live Q&As. I see him going live all the time, sitting on the same backdrop. I know nobody will be able to see this because we don't put the video out, but I see you sitting there all the time. All right. Well, thank you again for being a guest. Like I said, all your information will be on the description below. So everybody, click away. And again, thank you, man. Have a good day.
Thank you.